Senate Republicans are criticizing President Biden for pausing the delivery of high payload bombs to Israel. At a Wednesday hearing on the Defense Department budget, South Carolina Senator Lindsey Graham grilled Pentagon leaders.
If we stop weapons necessary to destroy the enemies of the state of Israel at a time of great peril, we will pay a price. This is obscene. It is absurd. Give Israel what they need to fight the war they can't afford to lose. This is Hiroshima and Nagasaki on steroids.
And Senator Lindsey Graham joins me now. Senator Graham, welcome back to Meet the Press.
Happy Mother's Day.
Thank you, Senator. I appreciate that very much. Look, you have been quite clear, as we just heard there, that you are opposed to President Biden's threat to withhold military aid if Israel does invade Rafah. But let me ask you this question. Why shouldn't Israel's war against Hamas proceed in a more precise way with a clear plan to mitigate civilian deaths in Gaza?
Well, I think it's impossible to mitigate civilian deaths in Gaza as long as Hamas uses their own population as human shields. I've never seen in the history of warfare such blatant efforts by an enemy, Hamas, to put civilians at risk. And the last thing you want to do is reward this behavior. They put weapons in mosques. They fire artillery rounds from apartment buildings. They put command centers under hospitals to maximize civilian casualties as Israel tries to destroy the terrorist group. You don't want to reward this by restricting weapons to the victim of their attack. But let me just say this. This is Mother's Day, happy Mother's Day, but this is a tough time for the world. What Senator Sanders said, not another nickel of military aid to the United States, is the most dangerous, irresponsible statement in the history of the U.S. relationship. This is not Vietnam. Israel is in a fight for their lives. Hamas says they will do it again and again and again. They're dedicated to the destruction of the Jewish state, not helping the Palestinian people. Iran, the great Satan, vows to destroy Israel. So does Hezbollah. Israel is surrounded by forces, terrorist groups that want to destroy the Jewish state, not help the Palestinians. This is 9/11 and Pearl Harbor all rolled into one. To abandon Israel under these circumstances would be outrageous, it would be dangerous, and Republicans are going to fight back against Bernie Sanders and the squad.
Senator, let me just push you a little bit, though, because, of course, the United States has provided Israel with tens of thousands of bombs and missiles, just to prove some $14 billion in military aid last month. So the United States, even the IDF has said, has given it an extraordinary amount of support. I want to ask you, though, do you think Israel is in any way prepared to listen to work with President Biden? And is he trustworthy? And let me ask it this way. In a survey this week, more than half of Israelis said they thought Prime Minister Netanyahu's chief consideration was his own political survival. You've said you trust Israel more than the U.S. Defense Secretary. But why should Americans trust Netanyahu to put the United States' interests first?
Americans should be all in helping Israel against an existential threat. The one thing Israel and America has in common, Hamas would attack us if they could. Iran is the largest state sponsor of terrorism that shouts death to America, and Hezbollah is in the same camp. I've never heard anybody in Israel chant death to America. The people Israel is fighting are bent on destroying all of the Jews. This is Holocaust Remembrance Month, for God's sakes. We should unequivocally support Israel. Yes, work with them to limit civilian casualties. They want to do that. I know they do. They have a whole battalion dedicated to that. But this idea of withholding weapons to Israel is rewarding the tactics of Hamas to put civilians at risk. Here's my statement to the administration. Sit down with Israel, keep the weapons flowing and work out a plan, if you can, that gets us all to where we need to be. I talked with Israel this morning. They are discussing with the Biden administration a way forward. I am somewhat hopeful we can jump over this impasse, but do not let Bernie Sanders run this war. Bernie Sanders and the squad are insane when it comes to how to defend Israel. He just said on national television, cut off every nickel of military aid to the Jewish state who's being threatened with oblivion. Shut these people down. This decision was political. He's trying to appease the radical left. Biden is.
Senator, just to be clear, the administration's position is not to cut off every nickel. And I guess the question is, why does Israel need the most massive bombs that can potentially level an entire bloc in order to wage this war? Why can't it be more precise?
Listen, you know, here's what I would say about fighting an enemy who wants to kill you and your family. Why did we drop 2 bombs, nuclear bombs, on Hiroshima and Nagasaki to end a war that we couldn't afford to lose? You don't understand, apparently, what Israel is facing. They're facing 3 groups. Iran, who has received $80 billion in aid. When Trump left office, they were exporting 300 barrels of oil a day. Now they're at 1.3 million a day. They've been enriched by Biden. They're taking that money to kill all the Jews. So when we were faced with destruction as a nation after Pearl Harbor, fighting the Germans and the Japanese, we decided to end the war by bombing Hiroshima and Nagasaki with nuclear weapons. That was the right decision. Give Israel the bombs they need to end the war they can't afford to lose, and work with them to minimize casualties.
Senator, that military officials would argue that there has been so much technology since those bombs were dropped that for that very reason, that is why Israel and other developed countries can be more precise. But let me ask it this way, because President Biden is not the first president to use arms shipments to try to influence Israeli policy. As you know, former President Ronald Reagan on multiple occasions withheld weapons to impact Israel's military actions. Did President Reagan show that using U.S. military aid as leverage can actually be an effective way to rein in and impact Israel's policy?
When you're telling the world you're going to restrict weapons delivery to the Jewish state who is fighting a 3-front war for their survival, it emboldens Iran, it emboldens Hamas. Sinwar is probably juiced up on the idea there's daylight between the United States and Israel. The hostage deal is harder. This is the worst decision in the history of the U.S.-Israel relationship to deny weapons at a time the Jewish state could be destroyed. So here's what I would say. There is some hope we can get over this. Non-negotiable the destruction of Hamas. Nobody in Israel will allow Hamas to be standing militarily or politically when this is over. How we get there is subject to negotiation. My problem is not with the weapons that Israel is using. My problem is with the tactics that Hamas is using, and the idea that America would not send a nickel of aid, echoed by a United States senator when all the Jews are trying to be killed by radical Islamic groups, tells us where we're at as a nation. The Republican Party is with Israel without apology.
Well, historians would say, why is it okay for Reagan to do it and not President Biden? But let me ask you about
why is it okay?
deal.
Well, can I say this? Why is it okay for America to drop 2 nuclear bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki to end their existential threat war? Why was it okay for us to do that? I thought it was okay. To Israel, do whatever you have to do to survive as a Jewish state.
Senator, again, military officials say the technology has changed. But let me ask you about how all
these
of this
military
could
officials that you're talking about
let me ask you
are
something.
full of crap.
Let me ask you something that I know you care a lot about, and that is the Saudi normalization deal. How would a ground invasion into Rafah impact what you believe is critical, getting a deal for normalization in the region with Saudi Arabia?
Really good question. Number one, I want to keep pursuing this because you asked Tony a good question. What happens the day after? To my friends in Israel, what happens the day after? To Tony, what happens the day after? I want the Arab world, the UAE and Saudi Arabia, to come in and give the Palestinian people hope once we destroy Hamas. I want normalization between Saudi Arabia and Israel, and that's the worst nightmare for Iran. That's why October 7th, I think, happened. Here's what's happening. When you deny weapons, Israel weapons, the Saudis are beginning to wonder, are we a good ally? Should I sign up to this? Will they turn on me if I get in a conflict? So I think the biggest threat to the deal is to use Rafah invasion. The deal is a negotiating tool to back Israel off. I am still going to pursue the deal. I hope we can get this issue with the weapons transfers behind us, and we can get back on setting the conditions where we can normalize between Saudi Arabia and Israel, and as part of that, have a new Palestinian opportunity where they'll have a better life, where the Arabs help them rebuild Gaza and the West Bank with a new governing structure. I'm not giving up on that. I've just never been more worried about the signals we're sending to our enemies than I am right now. What we're doing to Israel is unconscionable, and it needs to stop. We need to be with Israel without apology.
Very quickly, Senator, before I let you go, a quick question about 2024. Will you accept the results of the 2024 election, no matter who wins?
Yeah, I'll accept it. I think, if there's no massive cheating, I accepted 2020. Here's what I would say. President Trump is poised to win. He said last night, when it comes to Israel, I will have their back. I will give them what they need. Bernie Sanders is wrong about the polling here. Most Americans, 80%, side with Israel. The 20%, unfortunately, are in Congress and the State Department that side with Hamas. That's the problem with this war.
All right, Senator Sanders, we are out of time. Senator Graham, I should say. You just invoked the other senator's name.
We're often confused. We're often confused. Yeah.
Senator Lindsey Graham, thank you so much.
Happy
We're out
Mother's
of time. Thank you very much. Appreciate your joining us.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.